Hello and welcome to this fourth tutorial on using Photoshop for t-shirt printing with FastARTIST and FastRIP. In this tutorial we're going to be taking a look at color management settings, so let's get started. If you go to the edit menu and select color settings, it will bring up the color settings dialog. From here it's possible to alter my color management policies to suit the way I wish to work. Now of course you may use Photoshop for other purposes such as web design, so it's important to consider these next tips as advisory only. Ultimately you're going to need to make your own choices on the settings you wish to use. If you're not too sure what a color or ICC profile is, then take a look at our Introduction to Color Management tutorial on the cadlink.com website. If you've not already signed up to use our info source area, you'll simply need to create a username and login, but it's 100% free for anyone to use. These tutorials on color management will give you a guide to the basics and help you understand the tips we'll give you in this tutorial far better. So make sure you check them out. Okay, so when you're using multiple software applications on your computer, it's a good idea to decide on a standard RGB working color space that can be used across all these applications. The three most common RGB color spaces are sRGB, Adobe RGB and Apple RGB. Adobe RGB tends to be most popular with photographers. sRGB is more commonly used as a web standard and by pre-press people. And Apple RGB is also more commonly used by pre-press. Now because the color gamut of a t-shirt printer is relatively small, in fact smaller than any of these color spaces, it doesn't really matter which one you choose to work with, but it's well worth knowing that the default working color space in FastRIP and FastARTIST is equivalent to Adobe RGB. So if you're going to be using a color space other than this, then it's good practice to set up FastARTIST and FastRIP to match your choice. This workflow needs to be extended to any other graphic packages you may want to use, such as Illustrator or Corel. When you save an image out of Photoshop, you can choose to embed the color profile, and the good news is that FastARTIST and FastRIP will recognize this and allow you to manage your options. However, it's still a good idea to set up a consistent color management policy in case you forget to embed a profile, and to make life simple when receiving images from other sources such as a digital camera. Okay, so let's say in Photoshop you're already using Adobe RGB. If this is the case, you don't need to do anything, as this is the default setting for FastARTIST and FastRIP. If you want to use a different color space other than Adobe RGB, then watch on and I will go through how to make the necessary changes in FastARTIST and FastRIP so that things are kept consistent. Okay, so FastRIP first then. I'm going to go to the Q menu and select Properties. From this list of options, I am going to go to the ICC tab. With the Override Input Profiles box checked, I can then change the profile set. With these steps complete, I can change my RGB and CMYK tags to match those in Photoshop. So for example, let's say that in Photoshop I had set them to sRGB. I would do the same here. It's always good practice to set the same values for both line art and bitmaps. If you don't, you may find inconsistencies with bitmap and vectors that share the same RGB values. To configure FastARTIST in the same way, go to the Options menu and select FastARTIST Setup and then Color Management. Then switch from Enhanced to Custom. You can now make changes to your RGB and CMYK tags in the same fashion. Once you have made these settings, click the Set Defaults tab here, and all future documents will then use these settings. Okay, once you have decided on a working color space and implemented the settings to Photoshop, FastARTIST and FastRIP, you will need to decide how to manage profile mismatches. Let's say that you have decided to use the working color space Adobe RGB and that you have set up all your software apps to run with this policy. That's fine for all the artwork you generate. However, if you get sent an image or some files from a customer who is not using the same color management policies as you could end up with a profile mismatch. And you will need to decide how to handle this. Here I am working with FastARTIST. I'm going to go to the File menu and import an image with an embedded color space that's different to that I currently have set with this software. FastARTIST brings up this dialog giving me a choice of action. It's generally a good idea to convert the image to your working color space, particularly if your design is made up of objects from multiple sources, as this will keep color management consistent. An important tip here is that choosing discard will ignore any color profile that's been embedded in the file and ultimately mean a strong chance of mismatch in the final print. Okay, so you have set up a color management policy to ensure consistency across applications you use, but you also need to consider proofing colors. And this basically means being able to see on screen what your colors will look like when printed on your chosen device. In Photoshop, under the View menu is an option called Proof Colors, and this will enable you to see colors on screen as they will be printed. In order to use this function correctly, you will need to configure Photoshop with the printer profile that will be used when you print from FastRIP. So in Photoshop, I'm going to go to the Edit menu and select Color Settings. In the CMYK box, I'm going to drop down the menu and select Load CMYK. I can now browse to the location of my printer profiles, which is as follows. First, we're going to look to the drive that FastARTIST is installed on. Here there is a folder called FastARTIST. Double click this and then double click FastRIP. And then this folder called RIP. In here you will see another folder called System. Double click this and then finally you can access the C-Links directory. There will be a folder in here that relates to the device you are using. So for example, if you're using a TJet Blazer, that's what the name of the file will be. From here I can identify the print mode I will use when I produce the job on the TJet. Okay, with that selected I can click OK. So now if we return to Photoshop and use the proof color feature, I can be confident that colors are being displayed according to the printer, and furthermore the print mode I will be using on the final job. Another good feature to use in this view menu is gamut warning. This will identify what colors cannot be color matched by your printer. It's good practice to use these methods to ensure better color management and accurate screen proofing. However, remember it may be necessary to reset these choices when you use Photoshop for other purposes or if you're going to work with CMYK images. It's also worth considering that these steps will produce a far more accurate result if you have a properly calibrated monitor or even better a custom profile for your monitor. The tutorials that we mentioned before on basic color theory that can be found on the CADlink website will explain this process in more detail. Okay, so once you've finished with your images in Photoshop, you'll need to get them across to FastARTIST or FastRIP for production. You can't use the file print method to send images with transparency to FastARTIST or FastRIP, and this is because the Microsoft printing system and Photoshop doesn't support transparency in the file print method. So you must save your files as a PSD, TIFF or PNG and then import them into FastRIP or FastARTIST. If you need a more automated system of printing, it's possible to set up a hot folder in FastRIP and you can then save files into this area and they will be processed automatically. Okay, well that concludes this session on color management. For more information on the best way to get your files from Photoshop to FastARTIST and FastRIP, then check out our separate tutorial which covers this topic in full.